Hello, everyone, and welcome to McGill Cares webcast series supporting family and informal caregivers. I'm Claire Webster, a former caregiver, certified dementia care consultant, and founder of McGill University's Dementia Education Program. I work with a dynamic team of leading healthcare professionals to oversee the program, who include Dr. José Moret from the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Dr. Serge Gauthier, Professor Emeritus, formerly of the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging. McGill Cares is supported by the Amelia Saputo Community Outreach for Dementia Care. The McGill Dementia Education Program offers a comprehensive range of free resources to educate and support persons living with dementia, family and informal caregivers, healthcare professionals, medical students, and the public at large. One of our most important resources is our Dementia Companion Guide, which can be downloaded for free and is now available in over 12 different languages. Printed copies are available to be purchased on Amazon, and all proceeds support our program. And we have recently also just introduced a free online education program for family caregivers that's available in English and French. So today we are having a heart-to-heart with one of my very, very close friends, Christina Smith, who is the Mayor of Westmount. And we're going to be talking about her caregiving journey to her late father. Christina has been involved in Westmount municipal politics since 2013, when she was elected as a councillor, and she has been mayor of Westmount since 2017. We're going to be talking about her experience as a caregiver to her late father, who recently passed away from Alzheimer's disease, the impact that it had on her and her family, as well as some of the challenges, as well as positive encounters that she has experienced within the healthcare system. Welcome to McGill Cares, Christina.
Thank you, Claire. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
I'm so happy that we are going to be able to have this heart-to-heart conversation. And, you really represent the sandwich generation of caregivers. Not only do you have a very big career, but you're also the mother to three children. I know that you have a great supportive husband, Josh. But perhaps you could just give us an idea of, tell us about your family.
So yeah, as you mentioned, I am the mayor of Westmount, and I have three kids: a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And in there, they do all the things that many kids are doing: lots of sports, lots of activities. I have my 14-year-old, which is my son, has some special needs, so that is also another level of care and busyness in our family, obviously. But I do have, I have what I would have thought a great support network. And I've also, since COVID, like many of us of our generation, really had to start taking care of our parents a little bit more. And, some of that we began in COVID obviously continued, right? Whether that was, buying the groceries or helping with the preparing of meals. And so I was the primary caregiver, or I continue to be with my mom, but I was the primary sort of caregiver and coordinator and driver to appointments and things like that as well for my dad, who did, as you mentioned, he passed away in February.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. And thank you for, willing to talk about this, because it's, his passing is still quite raw and
Yeah.
happened. So why don't can you talk about, like, what were some of the signs and symptoms? Like, how did it begin with him? We talk about dementia. Like, what happened?
Yeah, and so and I've followed your journey and your discussions on this, and I always felt like, oh, like I'll be ready for this. And I remember you had reminded me once, you are not, and you don't really, I did not really understand it until I was really in it. And my parents lived independently. My father was driving up until last March. At the age of 92, he was driving. And had just been given his driver's license, passed the test with flying colors again, which was astounding to me. So it just, the process started, sort of at Christmas in 2022, I guess. People who wouldn't see him all the time like my sister-in-law made a comment to me of like, wow, like I really see a difference in your dad, because my dad was a complete and total dynamo. Up until he was 92, he was walking often 10 kilometers a day. He knew everybody. He talked to everybody along his walks. He was really active in his church. He played golf. He was he lived a really great life up until his last year was really, really difficult. And so I started noticing it as well. And I think what I saw and what you have often talked about is the spouse is kind of, I don't know, covering up a little bit, not wanting to admit it, is living it, but is also really struggling in it. And I didn't realize how tough it was for my mom and how she was really sort of cracking under pressure, but she also didn't want caregivers in her house. She didn't want, round the clock people she didn't know, things like that. And his decline was pretty significant pretty quickly. So after Christmas, it was still, sort of okay. And then one day last March, in the March, I guess a year ago, essentially, or a little over a year ago, he got up at, I guess, about 5 o'clock in the morning and he was still driving at this point, drove his car. They lived in Beaconsfield, and he drove to Vaudreuil for some reason. Nobody can understand why. And the car broke down, or he didn't know how to restart. Something happened. And he was outside of a Tim Hortons, this 92-year-old man, on a snowy March morning, trying to push his car. And a very nice dad who had just dropped his kids off at hockey, this very early in the morning, got out of his car to go and help him, and realized pretty quickly he was very confused. Asked to see his driver's license to get his address, and he brought him home.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And so I was away at the time, and this is a Sunday morning, and my mom just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to deal with it. And by the Tuesday called me and said, this is what's happened. The car is now in Vaudreuil, and I don't actually know how to solve, I don't know how to solve this or get it. And so that's when I said, you have to stop fighting me on this. You have to let me, you have to let me help. You have to let me get help in the house. And that was my way of getting rid of my father's driver's license, which I had been trying to do for months.
Had you, for the driver's license, though, had you spoken to the doctor, how, because my mother's license was taken away without any warning. I just gone, so.
Yeah, I spoke to the doctor, and he had passed his test, and both my parents were like, well, I passed my test. The government knows better than you. And I was like, actually, they don't. You should not be driving a car. And I would make an appointment with the GP to take him in to say, please revoke the license, because they can do that if they have concerns. And my mother would cancel the appointment.
Oh.
So we had there was a lot of push and pull and tension on that front. But at this point, everybody agreed, and it really terrified my father. So he was sort of going in and out of phases, but he was very upset as to how did this happen? Why was I there? But also, and from there, the decline was pretty quick in terms of being confused and in terms of not living completely, in the moment. And so we got rid of the car. He stopped driving. I started, looking to hire people. There was always a reason why they didn't like that. My mother, I don't like whatever, a whole array of reasons. And then one day, and I have a close friend who is a social worker who said, and he started falling, but he could get up, but often, I'd have to drive out to get him, or my brother would have to go. And then he fell down a staircase, had serious fall, which was a massive head trauma. And a close friend who is a social worker, Mary McDougall at the Lakeshore, said, this is, and my mom just didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't know how to cope, which I get. It was too much. Yeah. And so I was actually in a Montreal City Council meeting, and I can see my phone keeps blowing up, but you can't leave in a council meeting. So I texted my brother and I said, you need to check in on them. I don't know what's going on. Text me back. And she said, he fell, but we can wait till you get here. And
she didn't call 911? She didn't call the ambulance?
She said he doesn't need 911. And then when I got there, I was like, Mom, it looked like it was a massive, massive head trauma. So he went into the hospital at that point. And the first thing I know, so we spent a few nights in the ER in Lakeshore, which is all over the media all the time. It is what is portrayed in the media. it is overflowing. Incredible nurses, incredible social workers, doctors who are dealing with a situation that is so difficult because it is overflowing. And what it seemed like to me, or certainly while we were there, it was overflowing with people like my dad, who shouldn't have still been living in houses with, on 3 stories and needed more care than they were given, but were not yet in that system or didn't know how to get into that system. And I had opened a file with the CLSC to see like how we could get, but it's such it's such a terrible way to go about getting the care via the ER route. And so he was in extreme pain, like extreme agonizing pain, where he had some nerve damage in his back and this massive head trauma and his stitches all over his head. And I, said to the doctor, I was like, if this pain doesn't subside, this can't continue. Nobody should have to live like this. It was, screaming pain. And he eventually, the pain did subside, and they were in that phase where they were like, if we medicate him if we give him any more pain treatment, he won't survive it. And I was like, but he shouldn't survive this. This is no way for someone to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were very empathetic to that. And so this is all going on. He stays, they keep him in the hospital. They're trying to figure out what to do. And then eventually he, stabilizes and the pain gets better. And they said, we're going to send him home. And I said, you can't send him home. Like I don't have a placement yet. You can't send him home without care. And this is where the social worker was so critical. And I think there's like a general underappreciation for social workers.
I agree. They play such a key role in the journey. They're probably probably one of the most important healthcare professionals.
The most important, the people who got us the most help in this phase was the social worker. Whether it was my friend who was not his dedicated social worker or Elise from the CLSC, like there was a group of them. They were so empathetic, and they understood that my mom needed the support. When they would ask me, like, what do you do? I was like, well, because I think they're sort of like, are you going to be here all day? I was like, well, I'm the mom of 3. I'm the mayor of a city, which is at this point also on strike. So all of my blue collar workers are on strike and like picketing in front of my house and picketing in the streets and handing out these flyers about me that are nasty and awful and full of things that aren't true. And I'm like spending my days dealing with that. And then I'm sitting in an ER all night long in the lakeshore. And I was like, is this what will break me? Like, is this going to be what?
And did it? And did it? Did it break you?
Close to it. And it's the first time, in my role, especially since COVID, I have seen a lot of managers go on burnout. I've seen a lot of friends have to take sick leave. I've seen the impacts of this job on a lot of other elected officials, where something really shifted in society during the pandemic, right? Especially with politicians. Like, it seemed to be carte blanche to be like, people would be shocked at some of the things that people write to me. Like it is, there'd be no other workplace where that would be tolerated.
And you've had some stalkers as well. I mean, you and I have had conversations. You've had some stalkers as well.
We've had some weird incidents. We've had a man we now have a restraining order against him. But it took him, approaching and harassing my 11-year-old daughter on the street to get that to happen. It was, I wouldn't say I was burnt out, or I think I recognized that it was happening. And I was like, this is, I would, by the end of the day, I'd just be like, it was exhaustion like I'd never felt before. It was a complete disinterest in doing anything else.
But look at the mask we wear as women, and I've been very open over the years about the burnout that I felt, but we have these careers, we have the 3 children, because like you, I had 3 young children at the time, right? Yeah. And it's society's expectation that we be super women, right? And and you're a strong personality, and so was I. And I mean, I remember I had, a couple of people say, could I pick up the kids from school? Can I help you? And I'd be like, no, 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 I'm all good. I'm fine, right? But like you, I would be by my mother's bedside, whether that be at the hospital or at the rehabilitation center. And I had people say, can I help you? And I'd be like, no, no, I'm good. I've got it under control,
Yeah, I think I said a lot of that. And then I had friends who very wisely were like, your dinner for your family is on your doorstep. And it was those little things that made such, like, when I look back at it, just that I didn't, go plan dinner or whatever, that on a Saturday afternoon, Laura, my friends Laura and Courtney would bring a bag and it had a whole dinner all ready to go that I didn't need to worry about. And it was, that's a huge help. But it's the burnout was the feeling of the burnout and just the intensity of the job. And the job is intense. The job is 7 days a week. It is, we were dealing with like a crisis situation in terms of a strike. Which meant that, none of the blue collars in the city were working, and they were blaring music and horns and really trying to use Westmount. They used Westmount as a bit of an example to all other cities that we are going to significantly raise the wages. We are going to significantly change the working conditions. And they were able to do that. And it was all happening at the same time. So I had like just this intense storm happening at the same time. And we had, citizens were furious because the city looked gross. It was not clean. The grass was, and at the end of the day, it all got settled. And, I think they have a very fair contract, but it was all those things together were really stressful. And I can talk about it and recognize it a little bit more now. And I always felt guilty because I'd be sitting in a meeting and dealing with the strike, thinking, is my dad going to be all right? And during that time as well, when they sent him home from the hospital, they did send it. The CLSC program was great. They sent him with round-the-clock care, with some nurses, which we had one of the nurses that I had hired prior to that, that had not survived my mother at the time was like, no, that's not going to work. He ended up sort of being the main nurse with the CLSC. And there's a system, nobody talks about it, but if you have good nurses within that CLSC program, they get a little top up from you, and then they stay with you. So for 2 months, we did have round the clock care. And that was a huge relief because they were all really incredible. There was a couple of them, some would change out and maybe weren't that invested, but there were two that were really incredible and kind people. Mm-hmm. One very new to Canada and just wanted to succeed, just wanted to work hard, and he was so, he just was thrilled with the fact that I was a mayor. And he was like, I don't know how do you do your job and come here and make sure there's sandwich. So I would, I was taking care of the food. So I would bring food for the nurses, for my mom and my dad and I wasn't making it all, but it was, a coordination effort on that part. But then what happens with that runs out, right? As soon as you can get a placement, because he didn't need to go into a private home. He needed to go into the CHSLD system because he needed a lot of care at this point. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they give you 24 hours. So I got a call saying, and if you don't take the spot,
you lose it.
You lose it. You lose the CLSC care, and then you lose the spot. And so I had asked that it be within my area and not my mother's, because I really was the primary caregiver. I was the person that was going to be dealing with the paperwork and all of this. And my mom just wasn't able to deal with any of that. And so he got a spot in TMR at Vigie Memorial. I had hoped for St. Margaret's because that would have been really easy for me because it's a lot, it's right down the street. But we took Vigie Memorial. I was a bit stressed about it because, that was the one during COVID that really got hammered by the media. And I spent a lot of time talking to the doctors that had lived through that and lived through what it's like to be splashed all over the media with like a very negative angle towards the work that you're doing and how hard they were working and what they did during COVID. And to have like the Gazette and all other media talk about how, you know, everybody's dying in here from COVID. And they were incredible from the moment he walked in till the moment to the day he died. They were incredible.
My mother had also been at the Vigie Santé Queen Elizabeth, and the same thing. I mean, she passed away in 2016, so it was before COVID, but she had the most unbelievable care when she died there, and she had the most unbelievable care. And unfortunately, they too were one of the places that were hard impact. But she had better care there than she had in the private system. You can't even compare.
Yeah. And they were kind, and from the moment, and you know, he was confused about it. And from the moment we got there, there's a big sign when you move in, and I would see it throughout my time there. And on a big chalkboard with, you know, a beautiful drawing is "Welcome, Mr. James Smith." And I remember when we walked in, because he was still walking at this point. He walked with a walker, but he was still walking. And he said, "Oh, finally, the respect I deserve." Oh. And like he still had his humor about him, and they loved him. And I can see how a lot of the patients are really difficult. It's difficult to care for someone who is, you know, physically aggressive or angry or screaming all the time. He wasn't. He was still funny. He was still kind. He loved the nurses. He never missed an opportunity to tell, you know, if there was someone cleaning his room, he would often say to me, "Don't forget, Christina, these are the people that run this place." And his humanity was still there. And I guess the difference, I remember growing up, you know, my grandmother had Alzheimer's for a long time. I was young. I wasn't the caregiver. It kind of intimidated me. I didn't like going to visit her. Like the whole thing was a little bit scary. And I remember that as a teenager. And so I was always aware of that with my own kids visiting my dad. But the dementia is like, they're not all gone. They are there. Like they need you. They want to talk to you. They need socialization. And they forget what day it is or where they are. Or he thinks he's 40 years old, but he still needed me so much. But it was a relief when, and at first, and I remember one of the social workers saying to me, because I would drop Robert to school. I would go to see my dad. I would rush to work, try and work like 8 hours. I was falling behind on things. I'd get the kids after school, do all that, and then I would go back at night. And one of the social workers saying to me, "We got this. You don't need to, like, you are going to burn yourself out. Yeah. And you don't need to come twice a day. You don't need to come every day. Yeah. And if there's an issue, we'll call you." And they often would. He would just call to talk to me. So I'd get.
Was it guilt? Like, was it that? Because I go through that with a lot of the families that I now work with. When a loved one is placed, they feel that they need to go every day and stay 5 hours a day. I mean, was it guilt, or was it like your
complete guilt? Yeah. I mean, I'm raised with Catholic guilt, right? That runs deep in our family. And when I left him there the first day, like, and I brought up, you know, he thought he was going to a rehab facility. Like, he thought he was going somewhere that was going to get him to walk better again. And so I set up I brought photos, I brought all these things with him. And I think he then sort of clued in, like, this is where I'm living now. And he said to me as I was leaving, he said, "I didn't think it would be you of all the people that would do this to me." Oh. And I was like, "Well, Dad, you know, it is me that's always, you know," I said, "I am the boss around here. So yeah, it's me that has to do these things." And then he, like, you know, it definitely, the first couple of weeks were tough for him. He would get very upset at night. We often would he'd cry at night, things like that. But he then settled in, and they really loved him. And he needed people, and there were people there. So when I would arrive, often he'd be sitting in the nurse's office, like almost looking like he'd been called to the principal's office. But he would just be sitting there, like, while they're like filling in their forms and doing their charts. And he just needed to be with people. So he would just sit in the chair next to the nurse, and they loved him. And they were incredible at the end. They really, I knew it was the end. I just knew. He stopped swallowing. I knew it. I could see it in his eyes. I could see that he was afraid. And they stayed with him. One nurse stayed overnight that night because she was so kind of distraught that it was the end. And then she actually said, "You go home, I'll stay, and we'll call you. Just go home and sleep, and like we'll see you tomorrow morning." And he died when I left.
Yeah.
But I can't say enough about like the care, and the system is broken. There's not enough. There's empty beds in those places because there's not enough workers. And so it's not that there's not enough room. The infrastructure is built in Vigie Montreal. Not every room is full because there's not enough workers to manage the patients and to deal with the patients. And I think that's something that we really need to deal with as a society.
So let's talk a bit about your mom. So once he got transferred to the residence, so what happened with your mom? Was this hard for her to have her husband leave the home, and like, how did this all impact your mom?
I think for her, she was, I think for her, when he left the house, and they got married in 1967. So they've been married forever, almost would have, they were 56 years. I think for her, she was kind of so burnt out and traumatized by the caregiver role and the stuff that was going on that she didn't want anyone to know about, where he would ask her the same questions 100 times in a row, or paranoid about something, paranoid someone had stolen money from his, there's a lot of paranoia that was there, or fear. And so once he left, and she lives in Beaconsfield, I'm in Westmount, and he's in TMR. And once he left, for her, I think that was, in many ways, he was gone at that point when he moved out. And she would go visit him at the beginning more, but it was hard for her. She couldn't, if I had to go that ends up being a 3-hour part of my day, which I don't have.
She didn't drive? She does
drive, but she's not that comfortable. I mean, that's going across,
Yeah, it's a far drive. Yeah.
And it's dealing with the decay, all of that stuff. Like, she drives to the grocery store, but she doesn't want to do the 40 and deal with lackady. And so she went less and less, and she really couldn't go at the end. And when she would go, and the doctor said this to me, he said, this often happens when the spouse comes and they're upset, it gets the patient upset, and then the doctors and the nurses and the PABs and everybody spend 3 days calming them down, which is what was happening with my dad, because he thought for a while, he thought that she had left it, like, they were divorced, and that's why he lived here. And so that was very traumatizing for him. And to the point where we all just said to my mom, I think it's just easier if you don't go. And she was like, yeah, it is easy. I can't deal with him, seeing him like that. Yeah. So at the end, she stopped going. And at the end, it was, my brother Michael and I, my brother Andrew, and Andrew and Jamie don't live in the city, so it was harder for them. But we went a lot, and I know I cared for him well. I guess I just wish I had forced the care in the house earlier, because falling like that is such a terrible way to go. It's and you see so many people, that's how they enter the hospital, is a broken hip, a broken arm, a broken leg.
Yeah.
And then the quality of life is awful after that.
Yeah. I was away on a trip for work last week with my husband, Stuart, who you know well as well. And he said, Claire, you should do a McGill Cares webcast on the impact that your caregiving role had on me. So I promised him I would actually have him on in the next season, because he said, like, you talk about the toll on you, but what about the toll that it had on me? So what toll did your caregiving role have on your spouse and your children?
I think Josh would probably have felt quite a lot like Stuart as well. So when we were, but Josh was also very empathetic to it. And then it didn't go on for some people, they live this for a decade. when
Which
we
I
first,
did, which I did. I
yeah,
lived it
which
for a
you did.
decade. Yeah.
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 So I lived this intensely for a year as opposed to a decade, which is very different. Um, but when we first got married, just after we got married, and we were about to have our first child, about 6 weeks before I was due, Josh's dad got a diagnosis of terminal pancreatic cancer that had spread. Essentially, by the time they found it, it had spread everywhere. And very shortly after that, I had a child, and Josh went into a very intense caregiver role with his siblings, where his dad wanted to die at home. And we knew that he was dying. That was a clear diagnosis from the moment he got the news. And so I think Josh was very, very empathetic. And I had this new baby that I didn't know anything. I mean, I was like, shell shocked, like all first time moms. But I had, my parents and my mother-in-law who both said, like, at the time, this is how we're going to help. We're going to help make sure that, like, Christina's okay. But so I think it brought back a lot of caregiving stress. It was a really stressful time for Josh. So he was very empathetic to me. But he also was very defensive of me in terms of, when the strike was going on, he'd walk down Sherbrooke Street and, they wouldn't realize it was Josh, and they'd hand a pamphlet to him about, all sorts of whatever, let's call it misinformation. And all he could think was, like, she's working so hard for you, so hard for the citizens, and she's sitting in an ER in the middle of the night with her dad and then getting up the next day. And so he was very, very supportive and very, very empathetic, but it meant he had to pick up a lot of the slack. Mm-hmm. And like all couples, I think that comes and goes, but it was a year as opposed to a decade, which a lot of people live through. And I remember the weekend that he was, by the Wednesday, he died on a Monday morning. And by kind of Wednesday, I knew, like, I said, we're in a new phase, like, less than a week before he died. And I told my brothers, and I was, I was at a meeting, and then I was driving the kids to ski and all this. And Josh said to me, you need to go back to the city. We were at up north, and he said, you need to go back to the city. We've got this. You need to go and spend this time with your dad. He figured too that it was the end. And so he was very, very supportive, but it meant a lot more on his plate for sure. And he's a busy entrepreneur. He's trying to get stuff done. And
the children.
The children were like, it was hard for Robert because of some of his special needs and being, like, on the spectrum and stuff. Like, he would, certain noises and sounds and things like that would sort of trigger him, and he would get upset about seeing my father like that. So he would go less. And Mary and Izzy would come with me all the time, and they were great about it. I mean, Mary found it tough because she was like, as you go into those places, there's smells, there's noises. There are sometimes people screaming and yelling, and sometimes they're not, but we would bring the dog. So we were allowed to bring our dog. And, but Mary was very sort of fascinated by the care and the medical side of things. And Izzy was just, Izzy has an ability to, like, go and hold the hand of a woman she doesn't know, who's 90 years old and doesn't know who she is, but, like, hold her hand and say hello and do some, like, so they found it upsetting though. And then I would say at the very end, like when we went in like January, they didn't go again because they were very upset to see, like, when the decline happened, and when he always knew who they were up until probably like January. And then when he didn't, and he was, he would cry, and that was really upsetting for them.
Yeah, I made the same decision too at one point because of the smells and the sounds, and the girls were much younger then, so it was very upsetting. And then, but they did come back. Like you, my mom went through the natural course of the illness where she stopped swallowing, and so I never left her side. So Stuart had brought the kids to say goodbye, which I felt was important. But in between those months, I didn't bring them anymore. It was just too upsetting for them.
So my kids, I didn't bring them to say goodbye. And I think that was probably, I wish I had, because they brought him, his grandkids brought him a lot of joy. Like he thought they were the greatest and they could do nothing wrong, which is kind of funny because like when we were growing up, he was incredibly strict and like, we did not never believed we were absolutely perfect. He thought his grandchildren were perfect. So, but it was different. You see a very different reaction. And then, I brought my nephew at Christmas, and he too was like upset by it. He's older, and like, so my nephews from out west would come, and they were upset too because they hadn't seen him in a bit. So it was such a dramatic shift for them. But I think it's important for kids to see it, and I think it's, like we've modeled for our kids that you got to take care of your parents and you take care of your family. And it's hard, and it's okay to see your parents, when I was, getting upset or crying about it. Like, I think it's in hindsight, I'm glad that my kids saw that we took care of them, and when Josh's dad was dying, obviously Mary was a newborn baby. The kids didn't see that, but we do talk about that a lot with them, like how, Josh and his sister Elizabeth and his brothers, like they moved in and one would sleep there every night for, and that went on for months and months. And I think it's important for kids to see that, like to see people caring.
Absolutely. I mean, I felt guilty for many years because as I was watching my mother unravel, the kids were watching me unravel, and my go-to was anger, and I was always angry and angry and angry. And then, for years I struggled. I felt so guilty for having my kids witness this. But then I realized, well, you know what? Like, they witnessed the raw me, because most likely in their lifetime, they will also be experiencing these tough situations, right? Like they will go through journeys, whether it be with, who knows, with my health or with their in-laws or life will throw them. And so it's not going to be a shock when they say, wow, now I understand what my mom or my dad went through, right? Like,
yeah. And I think it's important, and it's not easy, and it's messy, and there's bad smells and like weird noises. And that's part of it. But it is like, I do think, I would always think about the families or the people that don't have someone, and how does that work, and if you don't have it, like, I'm kind of mouthy, right? So I can be an advocate. I knew how to work that. And I have, friends like you that I can lean on. I had friends that were social workers. I had friends that were like, I had a network that I could tap into. And then there's so many people who don't have that, or so many people that are living on their own much longer than they should, and in situations that are unsafe, whether that be with stairs or carpets or all the stuff that you show in your book and in your presentations of like, these are almost like how we baby proofed a house when our kids
100%.
were little. It's you have to, like, geriatric proof a house. And that's what happened with my dad when he fell down the stairs. That obviously was traumatic, but at the bottom of the stairs, they had like a table kind of thing that had a very sharp edge, and that's where he like sliced his head. And now I look back on it and I'm like, why is that even, like, why was that table at the bottom of the staircase in the basement? Like but you think there's so many people out there who don't have an advocate, and don't have someone to help them, and the system is not set up for them. Like, the CLSC is totally overwhelmed by that. You have to proactively like go at the CLSC, right, to get any services. So if you can't do that for yourself, that is that's really problematic. And then they end up in the ER system, and the whole ER system gets clogged up by people who have fallen and broken hips and things like that. And that's really sad for those people. So I think we need to do better as a society. And like, we see it in Westmount. There was not just in Westmount, it's not in Westmount, but there was a home called the Liz that was built, which I know you're familiar with, which is, got different levels of care and things like that. And there was a great uproar when this was built, and there were people trying to stop it, and as there always is for any new building. But then you see it gets filled immediately because people need this, and people want this, and they need to be out of their homes at a certain age where there are dangers and stairs and carpets and all sorts of things that that can be a risk to them. So I think we also, when I look at it from my mayor's perspective, we have a responsibility to make sure that when that type of housing is going to be built, that we work with those builders, that we work with, whether it's the government or if it's the private sector, to ensure that those are part of people's communities. Because those people that are going to live there are going to be safer. They're going to have a better quality of life. And then they're going to be in their community where they lived before, where their kids live, where it just, the process of like being able to care for someone, you have to like simplify it too, right? Like I was driving to TMR and driving to Beaconsfield and driving all over, all the while, like with a pretty intense job and 3 kids. So
you mentioned at a talk that I was giving a couple of weeks ago that Westmount has a registry where people that are living, so talk about that, because that's really something.
Yeah, I mean, these are parts of the like special things that we can do because we are this small city within a giant city, right? So we're a community of 20,000 people, and we have our own public security group here, and they do all sorts of things. But one of the major things that they do beyond, like, people see them out giving parking tickets all the time, but what our public security officers do, they know everybody, and they know the vulnerable people, they know the people at risk, and we have a list where if you have an elderly parent or, if you have a child with special needs that might tend to wander, things like that, you give them, you fill out a form, you give them a photo, and so that they're aware of what the circumstances are. And then they will work with, and we've also got another organization, Contactivity, that does this, that checks in on everybody every day. And if you don't answer after a few calls, we'll go and find out what's going on. And that's a great relief to. I've spoken to people that are my age who maybe live in Vancouver or Toronto, but their parents still live here, and they're worried about them because they're and there's a lot of people of that generation, of our generation, that left Montreal, but the parents are still here, so they're worried about them living on their own, and people don't want to move. They don't necessarily want to move into what they perceive as an old age home, is like sort of the outdated term for that. So I think it's really important for communities like ours, like everybody, it's not unique to Westmount, this issue, to have that system set up to help these people, to keep them safe, keep them engaged, and to have activities for them. So that's also important. When you look at what Contactivity is doing, it's not just a bridge club. It's breaking isolation. It's keeping people's minds going. It's by engaging them, you're helping them in this phase of life by staying active, right? And that's just a huge benefit to them. So I'm a big believer in programs like Contactivity that are very grassroots, community based, and they deal with this issue all the time, ensuring that seniors are connected and have programming and things to do. And when we look at like a municipal pool, we have a class called Aquafit in the summer, and it is like the people that go to Aquafit are so devoted. They show up every day for it. It's all seniors, primarily women, because as we know, like as they get older, it's a lot of women tend to outlive men. And they love it because not only is it physical activity, which helps them with their mobility and helps them keep walking and not falling down, but it's social. And it's this incredible group of older women that do this Aquafit class that absolutely love it. And when it finishes, they're like furious when the season is over. So everybody has a responsibility, like municipalities, provincial government, federal government, to ensure that we do better by breaking isolation, keeping people safer, and
working collaboratively. Like you're the great example of how a municipality could work with a not-for-profit community organization, are all working together to support the citizens.
Yeah. And it's groups like Contactivity that can do it at a fraction of the cost of what we could run that program for, and they do it better. So support the people that can do it better, but they are very much part of, like, I see Contactivity as a huge part of the health network, because that's caring for that population as well.
So one last question. I could talk to you for like hours and hours, but I have one last question. So what advice would you have for those who are beginning this journey based on everything that you've been through?
I think it's probably the advice that you gave me a long time ago is to be organized and to have a plan, and that it is, like it or not, it's coming. So it's going to happen. I mean, I'm trying to help an uncle right now who's moving into the manoir today, who had some health issues. He's doing better, but it was, that situation. He did not have a plan. Make sure that you have power of attorney. Make sure, while you can still do that, make sure that your will is updated. All of those, the administrative side of this is enormous. But also figure out what you can realistically afford, and where you would like, where would you like your parents to live? How can you best care for them? But the process of care is financially crippling for some people. And people need to understand that as well. Like that this is, especially if it goes on for a long time, or if they need care in the private system, and the wait time to get placement in the public system, if you're not in an emergency situation, is very, very long. So I think people would do, so, when you gave your talk a couple of weeks ago at Victoria Hall, which I love, and we would love for you to come back and do it at night again, like you did with Dr. Moret and Dr. Gauthier. And, that sold out in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's my generation that needs to be in that room. Yeah. Because we will be the ones managing it. And I think that discussion and making sure people are prepared, because so many of us aren't, right? Like your parents seem fine, and then they're not. A broken hip leads to all sorts of issues. And I think it's just, being prepared, having an honest conversation with your parents about what they want, and what you can and cannot do, and making sure that you talk to the CLSC, making sure you know what resources are in the community. And there are a lot of resources. So there's, my parents lived in the West Island, and I have a good friend whose parents have just both recently passed away, one from cancer and one from Alzheimer's. And she lived in Ottawa. It was complicated, but she realized, there are programs, the Nova program, where her dad could go for a couple hours a day and give her mother some respite on that front. But again, they didn't want to move out of their house, and they had, were managing a house with a pool, and they had, these enormous health challenges. So really also getting parents, it's often that you're going to have to move, and that's a really, really tough step for them, but think about where they would move. And that's what I wished I had done earlier with my parents. And to have a better, just the paperwork is a nightmare, and the paperwork when you die is also a nightmare. It's all of that. There's a whole lot of paperwork involved with getting old. Yeah. So I would suggest to people that they get that in order, because that will make your life a whole lot simpler.
Well, I can tell you that the citizens of Westmount are extremely fortunate to have you as their mayor. Really.
I'm not sure they all feel that way, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, you certainly are. Thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today.
Thank you for what you're doing, because I always knew it was important, but until I lived it and lived that journey, I will scream from every rooftop how important the work that you're doing with McGill is, because we can do better. We can do better as a society. And as I mentioned before, especially for those who don't have an advocate. Our parents are lucky in that they had advocates or continue to have advocates. There's a lot of people that aren't in that situation.
Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Gauthier and Dr. Moret and I would be happy to come back and talk to the sandwich generation anytime. Let's get on that.
We will book a date for sure.
Book a date.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So McGill Cares is an initiative of the McGill University Dementia Education Program, which is funded by private donations. If you would like to make a contribution to our program, please visit our website at www.mcgill.ca/dementia. And I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter so that you will be made up to date of all our important programs, resources, and webcasts that are coming up. So you can sign up for our newsletter on our website, or you can email us at dementia@mcgill.ca. Thank you for watching.